Hello. Just a very easy question. Is there any empirical evidence for the existence of God?
Is there empirical evidence for the existence of God? I'll let Rodney say something about this as well. But this is the way I would put it. I would say there can be empirical evidence for a premise in an argument leading to a conclusion that has theological significance. Let me repeat that. There can be empirical evidence for a premise in a philosophical argument leading to a conclusion that has theological significance. So one isn't postulating some sort of God of the gaps to fill up scientific gaps in our knowledge, but rather we're saying that there can be scientific empirical evidence for a premise in an argument that might lead to the conclusion that God exists. Let me give you an example. Take this argument. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. Premise 2, the universe began to exist. 3, therefore the universe has a cause. Now, the second premise, the universe began to exist, is, as I've argued tonight, a premise for which there is good scientific evidence. This is a statement that is religiously neutral and can be found in any textbook on astronomy and astrophysics. It is a premise to which scientific or empirical evidence is relevant. And yet, in this philosophical argument, I think it does lead to a conclusion that has great theological significance.
Right. It sounds to me a bit like you just giving an argument, not real evidence.
Say it louder, please.
It just sounds to me that you're giving just an argument, not real evidence. I mean, when I mean about evidence, it's just, you know, any facts, any physical, anything we can notice. The only thing I can say is you have got a belief, but what you can argue that God exists. You haven't got really. There is now also a belief for God might not exist, but you can prove either side, you know.
Well, I would invite you to think about the argument that I just gave. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. That leads to the existence of a being beyond the universe, and then we can deduce some of the theologically significant properties of this being. You may think I'm being overly subtle, but what I'm trying to do is avoid this common accusation of God of the gaps reasoning. And I think that the way I've articulated is right, and there are good arguments for God's existence.
But no evidence. But no evidence. There is
yes,
no evidence.
The evidence is for the premises in the argument that leads logically to a conclusion that God exists. Let me give you another example, all right? The fine-tuning of the universe is due to either physical necessity, chance, or design. Number 2, the fine-tuning is not due to either physical necessity or chance. That's what Rodney argued tonight, from which it follows logically and inescapably, therefore, it is due to design. That is to say, there's a cosmic designer of the universe.
There is no evidence for fine-tuning anyway.
Well, Rodney, would you like to address
theories.
that question? There's no evidence for fine-tuning.
Well, there's a great deal of there are very many parameters which are fine-tuned. I mean, the classic example comes from Fred Hoyle, who was an atheist and yet discovered that in order for carbon and oxygen to be made inside stars, you need a certain balance of forces, you need a resonance in the carbon atom and so on. And he was moved to, this atheist was moved to talk about a super intellect behind physics and behind the universe, essentially. There are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. And there are multiple examples of that kind. Now, what I would say, I would agree with Professor Lane Craig, I think you're construing a very narrow meaning for evidence. The kind of evidence you find in the lab. Okay. Well, what we're talking about is a comparison not of different scientific hypotheses here, but different metaphysical hypotheses. So we're asking a meta question here. We're not asking, what are the laws of nature and what do they describe and what predictions can we make of them? We're asking, why are the laws of nature the way they are? But that goes into a metaphysical argument of the kind that Professor Lane Craig was describing. But there are plenty of other kinds of evidence for the belief that we have as Christians. There's the evidence from religious experience. There's the evidence that we are in a universe that has moral.
What is
moral
religious
values.
experience? Sorry, what is religious experience?
Well, it's a very widely and commonly shared. That people experience a numinous presence. That, of course, all these things need to be unpacked, and you need to go into the alternatives. Is it psychological?
Isn't that supernatural evidence?
Is it? Yeah. Is it? Yeah. Most of the kinds of experiences, in terms of religious experience that people have, you can't demolish them any more than you can demolish the idea that I'm speaking to you now. It's the same kind of.
We are going to have to move on, but thank you very much.
But then you'd come to the empirical evidence to do with the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, which is historical evidence. So there are other kinds of evidence.
I would like to be proven that, by the way.
Well, come along on Monday evening in Southampton, and you'll hear more about it.